Okay, so let's get into the core tenets of Macdonald's argument, which you are responding to in this paper. The first being, or well, I guess let's frame the argument first. So you have this sort of recapitulation of Macdonald's view called the anti-Jewish narrative, which is sort of the combination of all of these claims that Macdonald is making um, about the nature and behavior of Jews. And what are the sort of three main claims of the anti-Jewish narrative?
Um, well, um, in the anti-Jewish narrative, I think I highlighted three claims that I had not really addressed sufficiently in my previous work, um, but they were that Jewish ethnocentrism. So there's a theory that Jews are highly ethnocentric. This is a central tenet of I would call JQism for Jewish question or anti-Semitism. It's that Jews are working together, they're helping each other, they're rigging the system to favor other Jews. So that's one important aspect of the theory. And Macdonald argues that this has a genetic component, and that Jews have cultural features of Judaism that tend to expel those who are less ethnocentric from the group. So over time, they have become more and more ethnocentric. And second point I addressed in that paper, that liberal Jews hypocritically advocate for multiculturalism for Gentiles, for America, for the West, but they advocate the opposite. They advocate racial purity and closed borders for Israel, which is based on the extremely distorted telling of the facts, which is really not true. And third, that Jews are responsible for liberalism and mass immigration to the United States, that they orchestrated open borders in order to turn America and the West minority white, that without Jews motivated in this way, we would not have the kind of demographic transition that we're experiencing.
Right, right. So those are sort of the three claims that you're left with, and you're saying that rather than focusing on this group evolutionary strategy theory, there's a default hypothesis in place, which can be explained by more directly, well, in some sense, more directly quantifiable traits. The largest one, but not the only one, functionally being Jewish intelligence. And then there's a set of other sort of personality traits and maybe even culturally inherited traits that you think explain the outstanding levels of Jewish success in various, intellectual realms.
Right. So one of the reasons that I was the only academic who was able to effectively respond to Macdonald is because I have no problem acknowledging that Jews are overrepresented in certain activities, that it's not a conspiracy theory to think that Jews are wealthier than, or Jews are overrepresented in Hollywood. Uh, um, but I mean, that people can feel sensitive about talking about these facts, but I mean, if you don't, if you're not willing to acknowledge this, then Macdonald comes across as the truth teller, and you come across as the lying coward.
Right.
So how do you explain these facts? Macdonald says, well, Jews have high intelligence, but that they use their intelligence in order to advance the group evolutionary strategy. Whereas I say, Uh, yes, you can find a bunch of Jews being liberals or supporting multiculturalism or whatever. Uh, but you can find a lot of Jews in geometry and in nuclear physics and in chess and in poetry and in libertarianism and in socialism and in communism and in so the parsimonious explanation is that the same factor or factors that explain Jewish success in chess and physics and movie making, although Hollywood is a kind of different story, because I'm not saying that there's Jewish networking has never existed ever and that no one has ever been hired because he was a Jew. I'm not, because and ethnic networks exist in all groups, right?
Right.
And so there are some instances where um, Jews dominate for cultural reasons that go beyond just intelligence or these personality traits. But when you see very similar levels of representation, I mean, Hollywood is off the charts. Like that's at one point, like the heads of all 8 major film studios were Jewish. So, I mean, this is difficult to explain um, for the same reason that they're overrepresented in physics, right?
Yeah.
But
Well, I was going to say, I mean, you have some interesting facts here that, I mean, just get very difficult to explain any other reason. One, Jews are 44% of world chess champions, 25% of Fields medalists, 26% of Nobel laureates in physics, 26% in physiology and medicine, almost 40% in economics. I mean, there aren't that many Jews, right? Less than 1% of the world population, even in America, they're only like 2% maybe. So nepotism or whatever kind of network, benefits there may be doesn't explain all of that, certainly.
well, I mean, let's say Jews are just so conniving that they are able to infiltrate these important institutions and elevate themselves. But why do they win the Kyoto Prize at exactly the same rate as they win the science Nobels? How
Yeah.
does and
Or the
why
Fields
is it
medals. I mean,
and,
are those
well, you
biased?
can say,
Like,
let's say Jews control the West.
yeah.
So they control Sweden, they control Norway, and where's the Fields Medal administered? Where Fields Medal is chosen? I'm not sure. Yeah. Anyway, they control the Fields Medal too, but the Kyoto Prize, which is of a similar prestige to the Nobel, not quite as famous, but similar, uh, is the it's chosen by Japanese. Are you saying Jews have just as much influence over Japan as they do over the West? And when it comes to the Nobels, Jews win in the sciences, but not in the fake fields, peace and literature. So the
Hmm.
fields that actually are influenced by politics and potentially nepotism, which are peace and literature, because they just give them to people who, the committee likes, Jews win those at far lower rates than in
Mhm.
physics. So that's the opposite of what the nepotism hypothesis predicts. And with chess, again, very difficult. How do you, with all the nepotism in the world, you know, the average Joe is not going to be a chess champion. Um, so difficult to see how, and Jews have been nearly one half of world chess champions. And during in the Soviet Union, when there was a very intense government effort to identify and cultivate chess talent with no with one goal, which was to win. Jews were half of the Soviet chess team. Uh, why and now Jews aren't win. Now Magnus Carlsen is winning. So why did Jews give up and allow this Gentile to win? You know, none of these facts are very easy to explain on the nepotism theory.
Okay, so there's sort of two operations I want to perform before we leave touching on this point. One is addressing the whatever contention there may be over differences in intelligence among groups. And then the secondly is to actually get past that and to sort of sort out the overrepresentation. So the first being like just acknowledging that Jewish intelligence is much higher than Gentiles on average. And secondly, that it's very likely has a genetic component. I want to get that out of the way because some people listening might not even be aware of that. Or if they're aware of it in a stereotypical ways, Jews are smart, but they're not really maybe aware of like the magnitude of the difference or how it affects things at the far tails of the distribution. And so, your opinion, obviously, in the paper is, and I think it's pretty well represented in the data, is that, yes, there is this genetic component to Jewish intelligence. It seems that Jews have been selected for higher intelligence over many generations. And this gives them almost a standard deviation, which is standard deviation would be 15 points. They're estimated to be 10 to 12 points in IQ above the average Gentile, correct?
That's right. Yeah. The average white European Gentile. Yeah.
Right. So if the average is 100, Jews are estimated to be Ashkenazim specifically 110 to 112.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know how much of a background your audience has and IQ and population differences, but so IQ is, well, a measure of intelligence. Basically, if you give people a battery of tests measuring different cognitive abilities, their performance on different abilities is highly correlated with each other. So if you're good at pattern recognition, you're good at analogies, and you're good at memorizing digits and so on. These things are all correlated. You can be much better at one thing than the other, but they're all positively correlated. And so your IQ score is supposed to be kind of the best representative of your number of your performance across a variety of tests. So it's the best single number you can give to predict somebody's general intelligence. Right? And there's a whole debate about how malleable IQ is. I don't know. We can talk about that if you want.
Well, I'll just briefly say, like, I had an argument with a Jew one time on Clubhouse about this, and he was like, "Well, it's not that Jews are genetically smarter; it's that we just study so much." And I was like, "Really? Is that really what you believe? Like, you believe that like these Gentiles just are not studying as much as you, and that's why? Like, come on, man."
That's right. It's so there are a number of problems with that theory. One is that we've actually tried very intensive interventions to get to raise people's IQs by making them study more. And I mean, there's kind of a long story, but basically it doesn't work. Like it can work for children because in childhood, IQ is not highly heritable, and the IQ tests that are given to children are often more knowledge-based questions, so much easier to prepare for. But once you get into adulthood, like assuming people are raised in above a lower middle class environment, there isn't parenting styles, school, what you learn in school, none of that stuff has much of any effect on your adult IQ. So there's just no, I mean, this is the popular myth about IQ is that you just get educated and then and then that increases your IQ. But it doesn't. it's not, people will repeat this because that's what they want to believe, but it isn't true. And um, we have this phenomenon of population differences in average IQ and the distribution of IQ, some differences in the specific intelligences that different populations uh, have, and so East Asians, for example, are particularly strong in visuospatial reasoning.
Right.
Jews have lower than average visuospatial reasoning, but
Mhm.
actually, considerably higher verbal and quantitative ability. And when you're comparing um, the IQs of people in different countries, then you do have to be very cautious because there are factors that affect populations. So if you look at African countries with IQs that are supposedly in the 60s or something like that, that's not an accurate representation of their genetic potential.
Right.
So, but if you look at Africans who are raised in America, um, or African Americans who are, say, adopted soon after birth by middle class white families, then their average IQs will tend to represent the genetic potential. And so there's really no basis for thinking that the IQs of American Jews are explained by some kind of cultural factor. And if anybody could identify this cultural factor,
Yeah, you would get a
you
Nobel Prize.
you would get every Nobel Prize. They would cancel all the Nobel Prizes and just give them all to you. So we know people, like, they think that we know. Oh, the scientists have explained that it's all environmental.
Mm.
Yeah, you would know if they had explained. You would know who made that discovery if it had been made. And the reason you don't know is because no one made that. No, because there is no actual explanation,
Right.
environmental explanation.
But an interesting, so moving, I mean, you mentioned the verbal tilt as opposed to the geospatial deficit. Um, and what's interesting that you mentioned is that the higher average IQ is not enough to explain the overrepresentation. So now that we sort of have that out of the way, I wanted to get into just briefly maybe some of the additional factors that might be at play to account for this. One of the claims is that a 110 IQ Gentile might not end up, uh, you know, achieving the same amount or accomplishing certain things that a 110 Jew might. And as you go further up the distribution, it gets, even more expressive if you get up to 120, 130, 140 plus, right? So what are some other factors that might explain this?
So, people often accuse me of saying that it's all IQ. The only difference between Jews and Gentiles is IQ. Now, in my original paper in 2018, I said it's not all IQ and there must be something else, because an IQ of 110 or 112 can explain a lot. I mean, it's not a huge difference between somebody with an IQ of 100 and 110.
Yeah.
But when you look at the tails, like it makes a, because you get like much less the further you go out,
This is
in
distribution,
either
guys.
direction
If it
from the
gets
mean.
shifted, if
Yeah.
you shift the mean, you get a really wide difference at the tail end. Yeah.
So once you start looking at, let's say, Americans with IQs over like 160, or even over like 145, especially over 160, like Jews are really like they're, I can't remember the point at which they become more than 50%. I think it's like 170.
Oh, it's very high. Okay.
So, um, but the further up you go, the higher the proportion of Jews. So if you're
Hmm.
just looking at, say, people with IQs over 125, where the kind of the elites will be tend to be drawn from, Jews are but I something like 10, 15%. Okay, I did a back of the envelope calculation a little while ago. I don't want to get the exact number wrong, but something like that. But and then Jewish over representation becomes higher and higher the more you raise the bar. Um, but that I mean that doesn't explain all of Jewish overrepresentation because I mean in many fields, Jews are like a third of the leads, even a half in certain academic fields. Um, and it's not plausible to think that all these people are being drawn from the IQ 170 uh, population.
Well,
So,
there aren't that many.
yeah, that's just, yes, there are not that many to occupy all the elite positions. So there has to be something else. Now, in the original 2018 paper, which was published in a very mainstream journal, I kind of avoided speculating about this because I didn't think I would be able to get away with it and it would just be dismissed as phrenology. But this is a piece of phrenology type reasoning, which I think is actually quite reasonable. Assume so why did Jews evolve higher IQs? It was probably some combination of selection for Talmudic scholars and business ability, the ability to succeed in white collar professions. So, in order to be a great Talmud scholar, in order to be a great businessman, you need high, above average general intelligence. So that will select for IQ. But that's not all it will select for. Well, because there are other the IQ isn't everything. So there are other personality traits. What is it to be a great businessman? Does Warren Buffett have an IQ of 200? Do all these people? Does Elon Musk have? Is he the richest man because he has an IQ of 200? I'm sure it's high. I'm sure it's high, but that's not. But there are probably people who can score really high on it. There are definitely people who can score even higher on an IQ test. There are these mega high IQ societies where, they can ace any IQ test, and yet sometimes they're not successful at all, right?
Right.
They're kind of losers. So Jews would have been selected for IQ, which we know happened because we know the average IQ is higher for Jews. And they would have been selected for whatever personality traits also play a role in success in these areas. So somebody like Woody Allen or these Hollywood types, most of them are not successful because they're IQ geniuses. It's obvious. I mean, I think it's quite clear that there's some personality differences. You can tell that there's a Jewish, not everybody instantiates it, in such an extreme way, but on average, you can kind of recognize the Jewish personality, and every nationality has a kind of paradigm personality, which could have a genetic component, which is then reinforced by cultural forces as well. But there's some genetic basis to that. And also cognitive traits that maybe don't show up on IQ tests. So take chess. I mean, chess is a very intellectual activity, but it's actually not as G loaded as people think. So the great chess players are not, they have above average IQs, but not necessarily off the charts.
Right. Your return on chess doesn't just keep going up linearly with IQ increases.
But well, maybe it might be it does, but just there's some other factor that's even more important. Right?
Sure.
So Gary
Okay.
Kasparov, his IQ was measured at 135.
Right.
So that's the 99th percentile. That's high.
Right. Yeah.
But there are a lot of people
at 135, yeah, who are not chess champions.
Many of my neighbors, I live in faculty housing at Cambridge, so I'm assuming many of my neighbors have IQs that are higher than Gary Kasparov, and they're not the greatest chess player of their time.
Yeah.
So there's something else, and Jews have more of that on average, apparently, and that plays some role in their chess accomplishment.